Can an Easter hymn veil the sound of earth being turned by hand? Can a sunrise, dressed in church bells and clean linen, hide the truth of a man being buried alive beneath God's own light? And can silence carried for years like a wound that would not speak become the shovel that finally sings? Mississippi, 1837, a land of heat and hymns, where time crawled like molasses and justice came slower still. But this story does not belong to the overseer who vanished one Easter morning. It belongs to Isaac, whose silence had always been mistaken for surrender. Before we unearth what was hidden beneath holy ground, pause here. These are no tales, these are echoes carved from truth. If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. Easter in Mississippi bloomed differently on the plantations. It came not with lilies but with sweat, not with celebration but with the whisper of chains moving through dew-wet grass, not with rebirth but with routine, hymns chanted through cracked lips and prayers spoken not to heaven but to survive the next sunrise. At the edge of Bolivar County stood Blythewood, an estate not known for grandeur but for silence. It sat heavy on the land like a secret too long kept. Cypress trees leaned over its borders like mourners frozen mid-weeping. Their long-fingered branches dripped moss that never dried, even in July. Even the wind seemed to avoid it. But life didn't beat inside the house. It burned in the fields. It limped through the quarters. It whispered in the kitchens, the outhouses, the muddy paths that stitched the plantation together like open veins. Mornings began in the dark, the kind of dark that presses on the chest, thick and wet. Ashes were scraped from cooking pits still warm from the night before. Bare feet padded through straw and mud. Children coughed in their sleep, the old murmured psalms, and the young prepared for another day of carrying pain on their shoulders like sacks of cotton. The air carried the scent of firewood, mildew, boiled corn, and fear. It stuck to the skin and settled into the cracks of wooden spoons and calloused palms. Every cough, every groan, every creak in the quarters seemed to say, "We are still here." And through it all moved Isaac. He was tall, wiry, silent. 32, though no one remembered the year he was born. He had been carved from this land, raised not by a mother or father, both long gone, but by the rhythm of field songs and the sharp edge of discipline. His hands were thick, fingers like gnarled roots. His back was a map of scars, each one earned, each one remembered. To the other slaves he was dependable. To the children he was a shadow they weren't sure was friend or ghost. To the masters he was invisible unless needed. To the overseer he was target and tool. Isaac never raised his voice, never cried out, not even when the whip found bone, never questioned an order, never showed joy. But he saw everything. He noticed the way the front steps creaked on the third plank. He knew which horse in the stable had a weak knee and which kitchen drawer hid the iron keys. He watched the cracks widen on the garden wall. He noticed how the graves at the edge of the woods always seemed to sink after the rain. He said little, but inside a ledger was kept, each insult, each blow, each name erased and replaced with boy. He remembered when Lila, his sister, was taken to the big house for cleaning and came back quiet. He remembered the first time he bled and how the taste of iron in his mouth stayed longer than the pain. He remembered digging shallow graves for the sick and deeper ones for the defiant. And he remembered Jacob Vance. The overseer walked like he owned the soil. His boots never touched mud, though others cleaned them nightly. He spoke in scripture and punishment. He carried a flask in one hand and a whip in the other. He called the whip mercy, though it gave none. Jacob Vance's face was weathered like leather left in sun, but his eyes held no age, only pleasure. He had taken a liking to quoting the Bible before a beating. "Spare the rod," he'd chuckle, "and you spoil the boy." Isaac had heard that line more than once. As Easter neared, Vance grew louder. More religious, more drunk, he ordered fresh linens for the slaves, told them to sing louder for the guests who'd come for supper. He made them practice hymns under the lash. "Easter is about resurrection," he bellowed. "You filthy lot best learn how to rise." The quarters buzzed with dread. New clothing was handed out, second-hand rags from the master's children, cleaned and perfumed. Women were told to scrub the floors twice. Children were fed early so they wouldn't whimper during the service. But Isaac watched. He watched Vance polish his boots under the moonlight. He watched how Vance always flashed behind the chapel. He watched how Vance always took the same path behind the smokehouse to relieve himself, away from the guests. Isaac spoke to no one. But he listened to the soil, he felt where it was soft, he tested how deep his hand could dig before the earth pushed back. No one saw him take the broken spade. No one noticed when the troll went missing. No one asked why he lingered behind after morning chores. The cypress trees swayed gently in the wind. The garden near the smokehouse was rich and dark. It had always been good for planting, and it would be good for burying too. Easter was coming, and Isaac, who had never once celebrated it, had finally chosen a resurrection of his own making. Isaac had never screamed, not when they burned the mark into his shoulder at 13, not when his ribs cracked beneath the heel of Jacob Vance, not when he dug a grave for his sister Lila with bare hands, the earth too dry to yield and her body too light for the weight of her years. His voice was not broken, it was buried, beneath years of silence, beneath centuries of obedience, and in that silence he built a legend, not of numbers, of names, of wrongs, of every moment where the world declared him small, invisible and powerless. And he answered with silence. He remembered Lila's laughter before it vanished. She used to sing to the fireflies, barefoot, even when the ground was cracked with drought. Vance liked her singing too much. She was sent to the main house on a summer night. She came back with a torn dress and empty eyes. She never sang again. She was gone before the next harvest. Isaac never forgot the way her body curled in fever, how the other women wrapped her in sackcloth and whispered prayers that sounded more like apologies, how the burial was done quickly, no cross, no name. The grave was marked with a bent spoon. That spoon stayed in Isaac's mind longer than any hymn. It was the first true entry in his ledger. His second came with Jeremiah, a boy with too much laughter and not enough fear. He was caught stealing a pear from the master's garden. They didn't whip him. They hung him from the tree behind the chapel, and the overseer read psalms while the body swayed. Isaac didn't cry. He knelt to clean the blood from the grass, and he remembered. Every scar on his back had its place in the ledger, every lash a line, every bruise a footnote, every time Vance called him boy instead of his name. It was recorded in silence. He watched how the overseer changed from man to monster, how the morning scriptures turned into justifications, how mercy, the whip, grew more polished than the Bible he quoted from. Isaac memorized every lie Jacob Vance told in God's name. He once saw the overseer beat an old man for walking too slow and then kneel at sunset, asking the Lord for strength. That same night, Isaac sat under the trees, pressing dirt into his palm until it bled, just to feel what vengeance might taste like. He spoke only when spoken to. He obeyed without delay, but his eyes never wavered. He watched Vance drink from his silver flask, watched him wander to relieve himself behind the smokehouse, watched him stumble back to the house singing, "He is risen," in a broken, boozy tone. And as he watched, he waited. Isaac's mind became a map. each memory a location, each cruelty a path towards something holy. He remembered how soft the soil felt after rain, how footsteps vanished overnight near the graveyard, how Vance never looked behind him. There were no plans on parchment, no diagrams drawn in secret, only repetition. Each day he passed the same spot behind the smokehouse. Each day he pressed his heel subtly into the ground, testing it. Each night he replayed the ledger. He remembered how Vance spit when he laughed, how he called the slaves my flock, how he broke a boy's arm and gave him a Bible to chew on for the pain. Isaac counted it all. One day, while tending to the garden, he unearthed a beetle nest, thousands of them writhing beneath the surface, invisible until disturbed. He watched them scatter. He didn't kill them, he understood them. His rage wasn't fire, it was ash, quiet, cold, waiting for wind. Some men plot with passion. Isaac plotted with memory, and memory, when held too long in silence, becomes prophecy. Easter was coming, the master's guests would arrive, the table would be set, the overseer would drink, the sun would rise, the hymns would echo, and when the world bowed its head to resurrection, Isaac would kneel before justice. Not the justice of men, the justice that blooms in silence, that waits in soil, that is dug by hand. Easter crept closer like a rusted gate swinging open on old hinges, and Isaac prepared, not with fury but with rhythm, not with fire but with detail. Revenge for him was not a scream, it was a task, a sacred task, and every task needs tools. It began with a trowel, a small one, old, dulled from years of garden work. Isaac noticed it had gone unnoticed for weeks, left half buried behind the tool shed after a storm. He claimed it, cleaned it, hid it. The second tool was silence. The kind of silence that moves like fog, slow, unseen, chilling. Isaac's silence became deliberate. He shortened his words, lowered his gaze. Even his breathing changed, quieter, shallower, so as not to disturb the shape of the plan forming in the air around him. He began walking behind the smokehouse more often. He brought buckets of ash, dropped them casually. The path became familiar to him. His weight knew where the soil held firm and where it sighed when stepped on. And then came the rope, a piece used to tie bundles of wood, frayed on one end, soft on the other. He coiled it tightly and tucked it into the hollow of a log he had split weeks earlier. No one noticed. The garden fork came next, broken, one tooth snapped, useless to most, but to Isaac it was just sharp enough to wound, just blunt enough to bruise without killing. He buried it behind the privy, marked the spot with a piece of cornbread crust. Every act was ordinary, every movement quiet, yet everything shimmered with ritual. He began watching the moon, not for beauty but for shadows. He counted the time it took for walk from the chapel to the woods. He timed how long it took for Vance to empty his flask. He memorized the overseer's stagger. Every step of this revenge was a prayer for Lila, for Jeremiah, for the unnamed, for the bent spoon in the dirt. The slaves had been told Easter Sunday would bring guests. There would be roast duck, there would be a sermon, there would be hymns, and Isaac knew there would be an opportunity. 3 nights before Easter, he tested the earth. He walked to the soft patch behind the smokehouse, where the cypress roots ran deep but the soil was loose. He dug with the trowel until sweat streaked his cheeks like tears. He shaped a shallow grave, not deep enough to bury a man upright, but just deep enough to hold one on his back, arms bound, mouth full of curses. He laid wooden boards beside the hole. He tested the rope against the handles. He practiced the knots by candlelight, his hands steady, the rope whispering through his fingers like a serpent. He returned each day to smooth the dirt, to cover his tracks, to listen, because revenge, real revenge, is patient. He remembered the verses Vance would quote, "Vengeance is mine, saith the Lord." But Isaac had waited too long for the Lord. This vengeance would not fall from heaven, it would rise from the soil. The night before Easter the air grew heavy, thunderclouds gathered far off but held their breath. The cypress trees stood still, listening. Isaac barely slept. He lay on his mat staring at the ceiling, counting backwards from every sin he could remember. The time for keeping ledgers had ended. Now came the reckoning. Before dawn he woke, bathed in cold water, put on the clean shirt given to him for the holiday, brushed it with ash, so it would not gleam. He tied his shoes carefully, folded a piece of cloth in his pocket. It had belonged to Lila once. He passed the others as they stirred, their faces already weary, their hands already preparing for the performance of joy. He looked toward the smokehouse. The dirt knew. It waited. So did Isaac. Easter morning arrived wrapped in fog and false promise. The bells rang, the hymns began. Voices rose to praise resurrection, even as death waited in the garden. The guests arrived, white gloves, painted smiles, perfume thick enough to cover the rot of history. The chapel filled with clapping, children in pressed clothes sang of heaven while their parents devoured flesh in the great room. Jacob Vance was drunk before noon. His boots shone, his voice louder than the organ. He barked scripture between gulps of bourbon and chewed roast lamb like it owed him something. "Boy," he called to Isaac as he wiped grease on his vest, "fetch me the good book. The one with the golden spine." Isaac nodded, lips sealed. But he did not go to the house. Instead he circled wide, through the field edge, past the garden, toward the place where roots grew deep and secrets deeper. The trap was ready. The soil had been loosened, the boards were hidden behind the cypress roots, the rope was looped and coiled. He waited, and soon, like prophecy, the overseer came staggering out the side door. Jacob Vance, flushed with drink and pride, stumbled toward the smokehouse, his usual place to relieve himself, away from the chapel, away from the masters, away from witness. Isaac met him halfway. "Overseer," he said, voice calm as water, "I've found something buried behind the smokehouse. Looks like a tin box, might be contraband." Vance blinked. "A box?" "Yes, sir. You touch it?" "No, sir. Show me." They walked. The overseer swayed, cursed, muttered. Isaac stayed a pace ahead, leading him through the fog and past the trees. The air smelled of turned earth and dew. The ground sucked gently at their boots. They reached the spot. "There," Isaac said, pointing at the mound. Vance knelt. His fingers clawed at the soil, searching. A drunk man's curiosity is louder than his caution. In that moment, Isaac stepped behind him, lifted the garden fork from the shadows, and drove it into the overseer's back. Vance screamed. The sound cracked through the trees like thunder, but the chapel was too far, the guests too loud, the songs too sweet. Isaac shoved again. Vance fell forward into the hole. The trap took him like it had waited its whole life for this moment. He thrashed, clawed, tried to stand. But Isaac had already dragged the wooden boards across the pit. He dropped his full weight on them. Vance howled. "What the hell you—" Isaac took the rope, tied the boards to the tree roots. 1 knot. 2. 3. The same way he had practiced in the dark, the same way he had imagined for years. He could feel the overseer thrashing beneath the wood, kicking, pushing. The boards groaned. But they held. The earth had waited too long to let go now. Isaac leaned in, close enough that only Vance could hear, and for the first time in his life he spoke without being spoken to. "Happy Easter." Then he took the trowel and began to bury him. Slowly, carefully, like planting a seed. The dirt hissed against the boards, each handful a hymn, each shovelful a psalm. Vance cursed, begged, then screamed, then coughed, then nothing. The ground began to settle. Isaac did not rush. He smoothed the earth with his hands, wiped the sweat from his brow with Lila's cloth, pressed it into the soil. He stood. The whip called Mercy lay on the ground near the tree. Dropped in the struggle, Isaac picked it up, ran his fingers along the lever, then leaned it gently against the chapel wall as he passed, like a gift returned unopened. The overseer was gone, just like that, no blood, no note. Sign of struggle, at least not one that the white folk were willing to see. By midday on Easter Sunday, Jacob Vance had vanished like smoke in a storm. Guests speculated over mint juleps and ham slices. "He must have taken a horse," someone said. "Woman, no doubt," another offered. And no one noticed that the horse stalls were untouched. No one asked why the garden behind the smokehouse smelt of turned earth. They simply poured another drink and blamed the devil or the bottle. Isaac said nothing. When asked, he tilted his head as if confused. "No, sir," he'd reply. "Ain't seen him since morning." The sun set. Still no Vance. By Monday his absence had turned into rumour. Some said he ran off. Some whispered that he'd gone to join the Unionists. An absurdity. A few, the older ones, remembered stories from their own childhoods, stories of land that swallowed wicked men whole, stories of trees that heard prayers and answered not with rain but with silence. In the quarters there were no celebrations, no dancing, no open grins. But something had shifted. The air felt lighter, the shadows less cruel. One boy, no older than 10, dared to hum a tune while sweeping. An elder woman stopped him, but did not scold him. At supper the hands ate slowly, as if tasting something for the first time. Freedom, maybe, though no one dared name it. No one spoke of Isaac. No one asked him anything, but they watched him differently now. Even the trees seemed to bend toward him when he passed. On the third day, the master posted a notice. "Jacob Vance is presumed missing. A replacement will be appointed. Work continues as normal." And just like that, the man who named his whip Mercy was reduced to a footnote. His belongings were boxed, his room locked, his Bible left untouched on the windowsill. Open to the book of Exodus. Isaac returned to his chores, quiet as ever. He dug in the garden with the same trowel, chopped wood with the same rhythm, carried buckets with the same steadiness. But those who saw him now saw something different, something still, something rooted, something that had walked through fire and come back carrying only ash. Years passed. Blythewood changed hands. The main house collapsed in a storm. Cotton no longer grew wild in the fields. The chapel burned one winter, no one knew how, but the tree behind it remained, its limbs like twisted arms, always pointing. No one ever built on the garden near the smokehouse. Nothing grew there, though the soil was rich and dark. Some said the ground had been cursed, others called it sacred. Children were warned not to play there. Dogs refused to cross its border. Even the wind slowed when passing over it. And Isaac, he was never seen again. Some said he ran north, joined the coloured regiments in the war. Others said he changed his name and became a preacher in Louisiana. One old woman, blind and nearly toothless, swore she saw him in a dream, walking barefoot through the rain, head held high, followed by shadows that did not belong to him. But no one knows, because Isaac, like his silence, left no footprint, only echoing. Every Easter, strange things would happen near Blythewood. Chickens refused to lay eggs, horses panicked at nothing. One year a white preacher claimed he heard singing beneath the soil. They said he left the sermon unfinished, pale as death, and never returned. Locals began calling the patch the overseer's bed. Some laughed, some crossed themselves. None lingered near it after sundown, and in the quarters, now just ruins swallowed by vines, the story passed from tongue to tongue, but not as truth, as legend. They never used Isaac's name. They called him the Quiet One, the Digging Shadow, the Easter Hand. They said he buried a man without killing him, that he turned dirt into justice, that he whispered into the grave, "You gonna know what it means to stay still." Children asked, was he real? The old ones smiled. Real enough for the dirt to remember. One day, long after the war ended, a schoolteacher tried to map old plantations. She came to Blythewood, journal in hand. She found nothing but trees and earth and silence, until she reached the garden. Her boots sank an inch too deep, and she heard a sound, not of wind, not of roots, but of breath long buried. She left that same evening. Her journal ended with a line scratched in trembling ink. Some histories are not written, they are buried, and beneath that a second line, unfinished, smudged. Happy Easter.